Some films don't explain themselves. They just land in a place you didn't know existed until the image hit. Jung called this the collective unconscious, not a metaphor, a structural layer of the psyche shared across every human being who has ever lived. The archetypes that surface in dreams, in myths, in madness. Patterns no single culture invented, because every culture already had them. These 7 films come from it. Let's dive in. The Wicker Man, 1973. The Wicker Man opens like a procedural. A police sergeant arrives on a Scottish island to investigate a missing child. The locals are uncooperative. The investigation goes nowhere. And then, gradually, you realize the investigation was never the point. What the film is actually showing you is 2 collective unconscious layers occupying the same space. The Christian framework Sergeant Howie carries, sin, salvation, the sacrificial lamb, and the pagan substrate underneath it, older and unmoved. The islanders didn't abandon one belief system for another. They never left. Jung took the term enantiodromia from the pre-Socratic tradition, the principle that anything pushed to its extreme eventually converts into its opposite. Applied to the collective psyche, it means this: when a culture suppresses an entire layer of its unconscious long enough, that layer doesn't dissolve. It accumulates. And when it returns with the force of everything that was denied it. Summarizal is not a pagan revival. It's an eruption. The rituals, the sexuality, the sacrifice. These aren't chosen. They're compelled. The collective unconscious of a community that was Christianized by force, expressing what was never allowed to surface. The sacrificial ritual at the film's center is not an invention. Fraser documented it across dozens of unconnected civilizations in the Golden Bough. The sacred king, the harvest offering, the body that must burn so the cycle continues. No cultural exchange, no shared history, the same structure emerging independently everywhere. That's what makes Howie's fate so precise. He doesn't just die, he fulfills an archetype he didn't know existed, the willing victim who believes he is resisting, the sacrifice that completes itself.
How you figuring to raise them 2 without a woman?
Oh, the Lord will provide. The Lord is merciful. No, what a day this is. And there's little John.
What's wrong, John?
Come to me, boy.
What's wrong, John?
Didn't you hear me, boy?
John, when your dad says come, you should mind him.
He ain't my dad.
The Night of the Hunter, 1955. Charles Laughton's only film as a director, made in 1955 and dismissed on release, follows a self-proclaimed preacher, Harry Powell, who marries a widow to get to money her executed husband hid before dying. When she discovers the truth, he kills her. What remains are 2 children who know where the money is and won't tell. Powell hunts them. They flee down the Ohio River. An old woman named Rachel takes them in. Powell comes for them there as well. There is a sequence where the 2 children drift down the river at night, sheltered in a small boat, while Powell follows them along the shore on horseback. Laughton films it like a lullaby: spiderwebs, frogs, the moon, and beneath it, something older than the image itself. The motif of the innocent carried safely over water is one of the most persistent structures in the collective unconscious. Moses in the basket, Romulus and Remus on the Tiber, Vasudeva carrying the infant Krishna across the flooded Yamuna. These are not borrowings from one another. They are the same archetypal image surfacing independently across civilizations that never met. Jung would call this evidence not of cultural transmission, but of a shared psychic substrate that produces the same symbols because it cannot do otherwise. Powell is the other pole, the false prophet, the predator wearing the language of salvation. His knuckles read love and hate, not as a costume, but as the oldest binary in the collective unconscious. The shadow, dressed as light. This figure appears in every tradition: the wolf in the shepherd's clothing, the trickster who speaks in the name of God. Powell didn't come from nowhere. He came from the same place he always comes from. What Laughton understood, perhaps without knowing it, is that these 2 archetypes require each other. The innocent must flee. The false prophet must pursue. The The water must carry the child to safety. The structure runs itself. Ran, 1985. Akira Kurosawa began with a Japanese legend. Mori Motonari, a 16th-century warlord, called his 3 sons together and handed each of them a single arrow, which they broke easily. Then he handed them 3 arrows bound together, which none of them could break. The lesson was unity. History recorded that after Motonari's death, his sons honored it. Kurosawa imagined what would have happened if they hadn't. Somewhere in the process of following that question to its conclusion, he recognized that Shakespeare had arrived at the same place 4 centuries earlier from the other side of the world, working from entirely different source material. This is the structure Jung identified as evidence of the collective unconscious, not 2 writers borrowing from a common source. 2 cultures, independently, encoding the same psychological truth. Power does not disappear when it is handed down. It transforms. The unconscious material a parent cannot integrate gets absorbed by the children, who act it out with no awareness of its origin. Hidetora spent his life destroying other families to build his own dynasty. His sons learned from what he was, not from what he said. When they betray him, they are not departing from his legacy. They are continuing it. This is why the story keeps surfacing. In the Mahabharata, in the Volsunga saga, in the dynastic collapse myths of ancient China. No cultural exchange connects them. Every civilization that has ever built inherited power has needed a way to say the same thing. What you bury in yourself, you pass on. Kurosawa didn't adapt Shakespeare. He confirmed him.
Nie możemy zostać twoimi małżonkami. Chyba że uznasz prawo proroka.
Ale wolno ci będzie nas widywać we śnie.
Tylko musisz dochować tajemnicy naszego istnienia.
The Saragossa Manuscript, 1965. The Saragossa Manuscript opens with a French soldier finding an old manuscript on a battlefield. He begins to read. Inside the manuscript is a story. Inside that story is another story. Inside that one, another. By the time Wojciech Haas is done, you have lost count of how many narrative frames you are inside. This is not a structural trick. It is the oldest storytelling architecture in the world. The frame narrative appears across cultures separated by centuries and oceans. The Panchatantra builds it in ancient India, from where it travels west, through Arabic and Latin translations, into Boccaccio's Florence, into Chaucer's England. The structure moves. But the question worth asking is not where it went. It is why every culture it reached recognized it immediately, adopted it, made it their own. Structures don't travel that fast unless something in the receiving mind is already prepared for them. Jung's answer is structural. The nested narrative mirrors the architecture of the psyche itself. Consciousness contains a personal unconscious, which opens onto the collective unconscious, which contains the archetypes, layer within layer, each one older and less accessible than the last. Every time a character steps outside one story into another, the reader performs the same movement the psyche makes when it moves toward its own depths. Alfonso moves through the manuscript the way a dreamer moves through a dream, without a map, without certainty about where one layer ends and another begins.
What are you doing?
I'm looking at my wife.
Birth, 2004. Anna is a widow preparing to remarry. At a dinner party, a 10-year-old boy named Sean sits down beside her and says, "I am your husband." She laughs, then she stops laughing. Jonathan Glazer's birth gives no explanation. The boy knows things he shouldn't know. He behaves in ways a child doesn't behave. And Anna, despite every rational objection, begins to believe him. What the film is tracking is not a supernatural plot. It is the moment a human being recognizes something that should be impossible, and recognizes it anyway. The belief that the dead return in new bodies is among the most persistent and widely distributed structures in the collective unconscious. It appears in Hinduism and Buddhism as formal doctrine. It surfaces independently in Platonic philosophy, in the Orphic mysteries of ancient Greece, in West African religious systems, in certain strands of Kabbalistic thought. These traditions did not all borrow from one another. The same conviction kept emerging in different languages, in different cosmologies, from the same place Jung called the collective unconscious. The feeling that a stranger contains someone you have lost, that recognition without explanation, that pull toward a face that shouldn't mean anything, is not a product of grief alone. It reaches into the layer of the psyche where the boundary between the living and the dead was never as fixed as waking life requires it to be.
I'm the wrath of God. The earth I pass will see me and tremble. Whoever follows me in the river will win untold riches.
Aguirre, The Wrath of God, 1972. Werner Herzog took a crew into the Amazon in 1972 with no completed screenplay, an actor who was genuinely losing his mind, and a river that kept trying to kill them both. What came out of that process was not planned. It was extracted. Lope de Aguirre, a 16th-century conquistador, leads a Spanish expedition down the Amazon in search of El Dorado. One by one, the men around him die or are killed. By the end, Aguirre is alone on a raft of corpses, surrounded by monkeys, declaring himself the wrath of God and the emperor of a kingdom that doesn't exist. Jung argued that certain figures don't belong to the individuals who embody them. They belong to the collective unconscious, and the individual becomes their vessel. The ruler who mistakes his own will for divine mandate appears independently across every civilization. Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, the pharaohs of Egypt, Caligula in Rome, Conrad's Kurtz. Conrad wrote Heart of Darkness in 1899. Herzog made Aguirre 70 years later. The connection is real, but it matters less than the question it raises. Why does this figure keep surfacing? Why does every civilization that has ever sent men into wilderness come back with the same story? The Amazon was real. The danger was real. Kinski's instability was real. No script determined what the river would do or what Kinski's eyes would look like when the camera found them. The collective unconscious doesn't need to be constructed. Sometimes a filmmaker just has to be reckless enough to go looking for it. Picnic at Hanging Rock, 1975. On Valentine's Day, 1900, a group of Australian schoolgirls climb Hanging Rock for a picnic. 3 of them walk into the rock and never come back. No explanation is given. No bodies are found. The film ends the way it begins, with the rock unchanged, indifferent. Peter Weir based the film on a novel presented as historical fact, though no such disappearance was ever recorded. The ambiguity is the point. Weir shoots the rock the way you would shoot something alive. Slow zooms, haze, silence where sound should be. The girls move toward it in a trance. The audience feels the pull without being able to name it. This is precisely what Jung meant by a symbol operating from the collective unconscious. A symbol, in Jung's definition, is not a sign. It points to something that cannot yet be made conscious. Weir never tells you what the rock means. He just keeps pointing the camera at it until you feel something you can't explain. The image of the earth swallowing the human, particularly the female, particularly the young, is among the most ancient in the collective unconscious. Persephone pulled into the underworld, the Celtic tradition of the hollow hill that opens and takes, the Japanese myth of Izanagi, who descends through a cave into the underworld to retrieve his dead wife. These are not literary devices. They are the psyche's attempt to encode something it has always known, that there are forces in the landscape that predate human civilization, and that the boundary between the living and what lies beneath it is not fixed. Jung spent his career arguing that the unconscious is not a private room. It is a shared one. Every culture that has ever existed has been dreaming the same dream, producing the same figures, the same structures, the same fears and recognitions, without knowing the others were doing the same. These 7 films didn't invent anything. They remembered it. Thank you for watching.